Good afternoon, colleagues. On behalf of IBC on Environment and Climate Change for Europe and Central Asia, I would like to warmly welcome you to today's Green Transition training webinar, which will be focusing on circular economy. This webinar is the third in a series of 5 Green Transition webinars or trainings organized by the IBC. And this training is organized in response to the request that we received from resident coordinators and also some of the UNCTs and also the DCO, Development Coordination Office. Today's webinar is dedicated to RCOs, UN country teams, and especially the members of the result groups, which are covering green transition related outcome under the cooperation framework. The purpose of the Green Transition Training Program is to help UN country team members to further build capacities, countries' capacities to design strategies and action plans for green transition. We hope this training comes timely, as many of UN cities are now reviewing their joint work plan by identifying joint actions for the next few years. And also some of the UN cities are developing new joint work plans. So we hope that this training will also help to generate discussion in the result groups. The main themes identified through consultations with RCO offices and UN cities are sustainable finance first, followed by energy, circular economy, plastics, and enabling policies and strategic frameworks for green transition at the country level. Green Transition Training Program will offer webinars led by different agencies from September to November. And if any of you have attended, on 22nd of September, we had the first webinar on sustainable finance, and more recently on 18th of October, we had the webinar on energy. And for both webinars, we had more than 50 participants, which was a good turnout. And for your information, the next webinar will be on plastics, and this is scheduled on 10th of November. So please mark that day on your calendar. Today's webinar will be focusing, as I said, on circular economy, and it's being led by UNEC. An objective of today's discussion is really to provide in-depth insights into the environmental and socioeconomic opportunities of a circular economy. And also it will focus on priority value chains, including construction, industry, and agriculture, and will demonstrate some of the potential intervention points to showcase how circularity could be achieved. So we are very happy to see many of you joined today. We had registrations of more than 90 participants, actually coming from all 18 countries and the territory in UNEC region, in Europe and Central Asia region. And of course, now we have a bit less than 90, but soon I think the colleagues will join as well. So on behalf of IBC, the IBC core team, I would like to also take this opportunity to thank DCO for facilitating today's webinar and also the other webinars as well. And the content of the webinar is based on the expertise and resources of IBC members, because as you can see on the slide, we have 18 members working together under the IBC. This Green Transition training program is led by UNDP, UNEP, UNEC, and UNESCO, and facilitated by IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and of course with great contributions from other IBC member organizations and external experts. So let me pass the floor to Darren Swanson from IISD to give us the overview of today's webinar, and let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. As Sarah mentioned, this is part of a 5-part webinar series, and she mentioned the next one coming up on the plastics on November the 10th, and then the final webinar that wraps things together in terms of what are the enabling policies and frameworks for a green transition from a country office perspective will be on November the 24th. So we welcome you to those who have participated in past webinars and to those that will participate in the future webinars. Today's agenda, as Sarah had alluded to, we have two main parts to the webinar today. The first part, we have presentations on approaches and tools for the circular economy, and time for some questions and answers and a few little knowledge quiz questions. And also the second half of the webinar, we have a plenary panel with some guests who will dive deeper into some of the topics, share some experiences. And of course, that whole second part of the webinar is also a chance for you as participants coming from the country offices to share your experiences and also to ask questions. So the second half being a really good sort of roll up our sleeves discussion period. So how are we going to do a bit of the discussion? So this is meant to be a very interactive place here today. We have a number of opportunities for you to interact as a participant, of course, in the Zoom chat space. We encourage you while the presentations are being delivered that you, if you have a question, to put them in the chat space. And our presenters will try to, if they can respond in tweet-like manner, they'll do so during the event. And if not, we'll have a live Q&A session as well for opportunities for you to ask questions directly if you like. We've got some quizzes where you'll interact with the slides directly, and we'll show you how to do that shortly. Some polls to test sort of just to set some context. And we also have a virtual wall space that we'll be sharing with you today as an additional way for you to share examples on your side and challenges you're experiencing and support needs that you would like to see met. So let's get a little bit started here to get us organized. What will help greatly in this event to help you interact with your peers is to add to your name in the participant list. If you could add the agency that you're from and also the country office that you're in. If you could do that, add that after your name in the participant list. And if you have not done so in past meetings, you just go to the participant list and you can click on the dots next to your name, and it'll allow you to rename yourself in that way. So just a chance to see what country office you're from and what agency, and that will help participants to interact with you during the event. Next part. Now this is the virtual wall space, and this provides an extra way for you to share your experiences and your ideas during the event. So this is Padlet.com. It's an app. You can access it by right now. You could scan that barcode with your phone, and it'll come up on your device. Or you could take that link, which my colleague Leslie Pa, who is on hand here as a structural design support and also helping us backstop the meeting. She'll put in the chat space that link to Padlet.com. You can go to that wall space and you can add links. So you just click on the plus sign and you can add a post, and you can put in an example of a circular economy, some challenges that you may be experiencing in implementing a circular economy. And specifically, if there's some support that you're looking for as a country office for implementing a circular economy in your programming, you can add that in there as well. And you can put in links too. So you can add a link to a website, and you can also comment on someone else's post. If you like what you saw and or even if you have a question, you could put that on the post as well. So I encourage you to test that out and try that spot. You can edit your posts after you've done it as well. So use this space freely during the event to share things you would like people to have and to provide information. All right, and for the polls and quizzes, we'll be using slido.com, and you'll see this coming up here shortly. There'll be a barcode and a code you'll be able to use to get onto the event. So you have your mobile device handy if you do nearby, and if not, you can also interact by multitasking on another screen aside from Zoom to interact. So I guess without further ado, let's maybe start and set some context here with just something that we'll set up our presentations here shortly, and we'll do some introductions, but just a straight out question. How circular do you feel the world is today? So for you, with those of you with a mobile device, you could scan that with your camera on your mobile device. That'll take you right to the poll. And you can send in your answer. And it will appear on the screen, and we're just going to wait a little bit before we move on to the next question. But this right here will kind of tie into where our presenters will begin their sort of discussion on the circular economy. And we'll come back to. So let's see what people are thinking right now in terms of how circular the economy is. I think people are getting a handle on getting onto the poll. If you don't have your camera, you can just go to slido.com on your computer. And right there, you just put in the code IBC green, and you'll be able to access the poll. So if you don't have a mobile device, no problem, you can access the poll just the same. All right, so how circular is the world today? Well, in fact, most people caught it right off the bat. 8.6% circular, and our presenters will help us understand what that's meaning in context. And maybe just one more poll for those of you who are just getting started, getting the Slido poll working. One more question for you, just to get some practice here. What are the potential CO2 savings from using recycled materials, such as aluminum? What do you think the potential carbon savings are for using recycled materials? Let's give a chance for others to get used to using the polling. Now, this polling will advance automatically on your screen. So when we do some knowledge quiz questions later in the webinar, when they appear on the screen, they will also appear on your device if you do keep it open. Okay, let's move on here. Most people, yes, we're guessing that there are significant savings from using recycled materials, and our presenters will talk about that and the importance of that in the context of a circular economy. All right, thank you everybody for taking part, and I think you've gotten used to all the bells and whistles of the event. So without further ado, I think let's move forward to the event. We have the first part of the webinar today, where we have presentations organized by the UNECE, and we have two experts with us. We have Henning Wiltz, who's the Director of Circular Economy with the Wuppertal Institute. Will be talking to us about the circular economy and opportunities, and we'll also have with him a colleague, Magnus Benson, who's the policy lead with the organization Hot or Cool, joining us today for the second part of this presentation. And colleagues, if you do have questions for our presenters here today, please feel free to use the chat space to address those questions. And our presenters will try to respond also by chat space, if not at the end during the Q&A session to follow. So without further ado, over to you, Henning.
Thank you so much, Darren.
I'll stop sharing my screen so you can start sharing yours.
Yeah, I'll try. See, oh, that seems to work. So thank you very much for the opportunity to give a first input to this really interesting webinars on the opportunities of a circular economy, a bit on what is it actually and where are we on this track towards circularity, so the status quo. Then you mentioned it, I'm working with the Wuppertal Institute. We're a public research institute in Germany, working exactly on speeding up the transformation process towards a circular economy. So yeah, as said, thanks a lot for this opportunity. When we talk about circular economy, of course, the question is, what does it actually mean? And I have here one of the key definitions by the European Commission. They see circular economy as an economic system where the value of products, materials, and resources is maintained in the economy for as long as possible. And that would also contribute to waste prevention. So what we see is that the circular economy would be an alternative to the current linear system, in which we're mainly producing and consuming. Linear meaning that we take raw materials from different ecosystems, we transform them into products, we use them often shockingly in short times, and then we discard them. And instead of that, we would like to go to a circular system in which at the end of the use phase, we try to reintegrate either the product by repairing or refurbishment, or by recycling and then looking at the raw materials back into the system. That is the overall idea of the circular economy. It looks very convincing on paper. And what I would like to do in the coming minute is to discuss a little bit, why is it actually so necessary to support this transformation towards a circular economy. And here I try to structure my short input in 3 parts. A bit more on the definitions and the overall concept, the specific strategies, and then in the second part on the environmental as well as socioeconomic benefits. And then in the end, something on what we already seen on the slide, what is the a bit frustrating status quo of circularity that we have at the moment. If we look at the concept of a circular economy, we often have figures like this. There are many different definitions, and a really nice paper listed more than 100 of them. So also a lot of different figures. But I think what the key characteristic is, and that is shared by all those working on the circular economy, is that we need to link the different steps of the value chain. So starting from the very beginning in the design phase, thinking about how could we contribute to an improved recycling in the end? How could we make products actually repairable, durable? And I think that is the key challenge here. And that is also the disruptive innovation. It's not about adding something to our current system. It is indeed a complete renovation, update of our economic system. If we ask ourselves, how do we get there? Then we have to see that the circular economy, or becoming circular, includes a lot of very specific and very different strategies. Starting from the bottom, we have the more simple approaches, and what we actually already do in a lot of countries. We recycle, we try to recover the raw materials from the waste. We actually also have incineration of material with energy recovery. This is the first step of a circular economy, but there is of course also different approaches to extend the lifespan of products and its parts. And that would mean to repurpose, to remanufacture products, to try to refurbish them, to repair them, or to reuse them. That is the focused a bit more on the inner circles of the circular economy. And that also leads to the smarter use of products and intelligent manufacturing. And that would include strategies like reduce, so basically waste prevention, to rethink, for example, increasing the use intensity of products, or to actually refuse, to think, where is it actually meaningful, where does it make sense to use products, and where could we think about completely different approaches that lead to lower waste generation and lower uptake of natural resources. So what you see is circular economy is an umbrella with a lot of different, very specific strategies that often have to be combined in order to be successful. If we ask ourselves, what are the benefits, looking at the SDGs, there is of course SDG 12, specifically talking about waste reduction, but actually circular economy is about much more. And you see it here that basically for all SDGs that we have, and then we see that the circular economy can, or that these different objectives can benefit from circular economy practices, that they do that directly or indirectly, that circular economy can actually also facilitate the uptake of such practices, or offer opportunities to enable them. So again, the circular economy is a very broad concept, and I'll have a bit more concrete examples. What are the specific benefits that we can see? Looking at climate protection, this is a figure developed by colleagues at Material Economics in Sweden, showing that for key material flows, so steel, plastics, aluminium, and cement, a circular system by 2050 could lead to a reduction of CO2 emissions by 56%. And you can again see here the different strategies. So this could be achieved by material recirculation, by increasing the material efficiency, by implementing circular business models. And all combined, that would lead to this really impressive reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We did a similar exercise for Germany, as the so-called Circular Economy Initiative Germany, together with a lot of stakeholders from industry, trying to understand what are the benefits from improved circularity for the climate. And what you can see here is that many countries, of course, started to implement a lot of climate-oriented policies, leading to already significant reduction of CO2 emissions. And this is here in blue, the climate scenario. But if we actually want to achieve a climate neutral scenario by 2050, and thus staying at a 2-degree path at least, it became clear that this can only be achieved in a much more circular system. And again, looking at the different intervention points, extending the life cycle of products, intensifying the product use, and of course also improving the recycling. So what we see in a lot of countries, the climate targets that have been set, that are often already legally binding, they can only be achieved in a much more circular scenario. But also with regard to other environmental objectives, it's absolutely clear that we have to work on reducing the amount of natural resources and thus keeping them in closed systems. The International Resource Panel came up with a study that showed that 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we have at the moment are linked to the overconsumption, the clearly unsustainable overconsumption of natural resources, and even worse, 95% of the biodiversity losses. So we have to work on an absolute reduction of resource consumption, and for that, the circular economy is, of course, one of the key approaches. Looking into the future, it becomes clear that despite the environmental benefits, a lot has still to be done. The OECD did a really interesting modeling exercise for a resources outlook to 2060. And what you see is that without much more stringent interventions, the baseline would be a doubling of the resource consumption that we have at the moment, leading to 167 billion tons of natural resources in 2060. And what you can see here, and that is what I find interesting about the figure, the key driver is economic growth. There will, of course, be benefits from structural change, fewer people working, for example, in the agricultural sector, more in the financial sector with lower resource consumptions. And there will, of course, be benefits from improved technology. You see here, technology change will have a positive impact, but it's also clear that technology alone will not save us. So we have to work on a more systemic approach where just improving technologies is one part, but we also have to look at the economic system. And there again, we have the systemic approach of the circular economy. Especially the European Commission in the last years has highlighted also the economic benefits of a circular system. In its action plan, the European Commission talks about better future prospects for the European economy, about impacts on innovation, capital, productivity, and I think with the current war in Ukraine, especially the aspect of reducing the dependence on raw materials is something that makes a more circular system especially attractive. In the very beginning of the discussion about what are the benefits of a circular system, the L. MacArthur Foundation, together with McKinsey, tried to understand what could be the savings, the economic savings from improving circularity. And what they estimated was a really impressive figure of 640 billion euro, or almost 700 billion US dollar as net material cost savings. And I think since this figure has been published, every company also tried to understand what would that mean for our specific business models? How could we benefit from these economic opportunities? Looking a bit more into where these cost savings could be generated, now here from a household perspective for three specific sectors, for the mobility, for food, and the built environment. And this figure differentiates potential savings from different R strategies. And you can see that, for example, for the mobility, there are really impressive saving opportunities of about 40% by improved sharing. Normally, a car is unused 23 hours per day. And here to come up with more circular systems of sharing that could have really impressive benefits. For the food system, and we will hear a bit more about it during the panel discussion, optimizing the different value chains could lead to a significant reduction. And in the end, if you look at the bottom of the figure, you see that the remaining costs for households could really be significantly reduced, 60 to 80%. That was the estimation in a completely circular system of mobility. The OECD tried to understand what would circularity mean with regard to GDP development. And they did a review of existing economic models. And what you can see here is that the vast majority of the models that exist on that indicate really significant increases of the GDP compared to baseline. Most of them in a sector between 0 and 5%, but also half of the studies that have been conducted indicate even more impressive figures. What you can also see is that they differentiated between national, regional, and global increases of the GDP, and most could be done on the regional level. Here you have increases of up to 13%, indicating that circular economy is, of course, a win-win opportunity, but there will be some front-runner regions that can significantly benefit from it, and on average, the increases might be a bit lower. So it makes a lot of sense to be one of the front runners. Also looking at job opportunities, the colleagues at the Waste and Resource Action Programme in UK try to estimate how many new jobs could be created, here focusing on Europe, by implementing circularity measures until 2030. What you see is that their guess was 1.2 million new jobs across Europe, but also an unemployment reduction by 250,000. So much lower this figure, indicating that transforming a system from circular to linear will also mean that a lot of people will have to require new qualifications, that they will have to find new jobs. And I think this is a discussion that just started. What kind of qualifications do we actually need for becoming more circular? Looking at the overall status quo and against the background of these interesting opportunities, the necessity from an environmental point of view, the job creation potentials, the economic potentials. The question is, of course, how circular are we actually already? And Darren has shown it before. According to the Circularity Gap Report in 2022, the global economy was just circular at a rate of 8.6%. And especially frustrating, this figure actually has decreased over the last years. So there is still a lot to be done, and we have to increase the speed of the transition. And also looking at some of the front runner countries, and you see here on the right side the figures for the so-called circular material use rate, so the share of recycled material in the industry. Now you can see that, for example, for my home country, Germany, this is also just at 12.2%, more or less stagnating over the last decades. At the same time, the positive message here, already with the current technology that we have available, already almost 30% could be covered from recycling processes. And that is demonstrated in the Netherlands at the moment, clearly the global front runner on circular economy. Already my last slide, what I would really like to highlight is that circularity is a multi-dimensional challenge that we have, of course, to focus on new technologies that would allow us to recover more of, especially of the critical raw materials from our waste streams, that we have to improve in logistics and in sorting. But that has to be combined with economic incentives. We're talking about an economic system that requires appropriate regulation. So also the institutional aspects are really important. And all of that needs to take into account also social acceptance. So there's also cultural aspect to that. And only if we combine these different approaches in a really clever and smart way, then that would allow us to increase the transformation speed to a circular system, as it would be necessary looking at the environmental challenges that we face at the moment. With that, thank you very much. Really looking forward to comment and questions.
Thank you very much, Henning. And I think now we'll have Magnus will proceed and share his screen right now, and then we will take a sort of Q&A fully after Magnus's. So Magnus, if you want to queue up your slides. And I encourage participants to, in the chat space, while Magnus is presenting, if you do have questions for Henning, to put them in the chat space, and we will come together again afterward to address questions. But if there's things that Henning can address during the chat, he'll do so in the coming minutes. And right now we have with us Magnus Benson, who is the policy lead with the organization Hot or Cool, and we thank Magnus for continuing the conversation here and providing some practical insights on the circular economy for UN country teams. And without further ado, over to you, Magnus.
Thank you very much, Darren, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm delighted to be part of this training program and to have this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on how one can work effectively towards a more circular economy, especially from a policy angle. I was given the title you can see here, and I decided to take the word guidance very literally, and think it was actually a very interesting exercise to sit down and think through, based on my experience of working with circular economy, mainly in Southeast Asia, what are the main ideas that I would like to convey to people like you working in UN offices, working with your respective governments, trying to help them with a green transition and a successful development of circular economy policy frameworks. But first, I would like to share a few words about myself and the experience I speak from. I come from Sweden originally. I've been living in Asia for 2 decades. I'm based in Tokyo. I've been working for many years on sustainable consumption and production and related approaches, resource efficiency, waste and recycling, circular economy. Most of this work has been across the Asian region. I've been working on policy analysis, contributing to capacity building events, and provided policy advisory services to governments and to international organizations. Currently, I'm wearing 4 hats. As Darren said, I serve as the policy lead at the think tank based in Berlin called the Hot or Cool Institute. The work I do there is more related with low carbon lifestyles and policies with a focus on Europe. I also work as an independent consultant. That's the greater part of what I do, where I work on policy analysis and advisory on sustainable consumption and production and circular economy, mainly in the ASEAN region. And I've been working on projects for a range of international organizations. And one of the activities I'm involved in currently is to set up an ASEAN circular economy stakeholder platform, which has just been launched in Bangkok. I also do some university teaching, and I work with a group of Japanese corporations. So that's about myself and the experiences I speak from. And now moving to the suggestions that I would like to share with you here. And when I thought this through, I ended up with 9 headline suggestions that I would like to present. And it would be interesting in the Q&A later to see how this resonates with your experiences. First, I think it's important to be clear about what circular economy can realistically deliver. As you would have heard from Henning's presentation, in one sense, it's a very straightforward and easy idea to do more with less, to get rid of this linear model that we all understand is unsustainable and shift to more circular practices. I mean, at that level, it's extremely easy. But when you start doing this in practice, it soon becomes very complex. You have all of these different strategies that can be deployed, and you don't really know how to work with them in an effective manner together, and it's a bit more challenging than people usually realize. Circular economy is attracting lots of interest currently. There are many people working in this space, and I see there is often a tendency to oversell the circular economy approach and maybe overselling its opportunities and benefits. I think it's important to have a nuanced message about what it can do and what it cannot do, and the kind of timelines that are expected to actually see some improvements. I think there is a risk that people dive into this and that they can get disappointed. So to prevent that, I think it's important to be upfront about the challenges that are also involved here. The discussions around circular economy, I see there is a lot of polarization. On the one hand, I said that there is a tendency to oversell the concept and oversimplify it and overemphasizing maybe the opportunities. But there is also, on the other hand, there's been a great number of academic publications coming out in the last few years criticizing the circular economy as a very technocratic and technology focused approach to sustainability with a relatively low potential to really bring about the kind of transformative change that many people think is necessary for actually building a sustainable civilization. So we have both of these sides, that some people who are maybe cheering the concept a little bit too much, and those who are spending maybe a bit overly critical. My take tends to be that there is some truth in both of these positions, and maybe there is something in between here. It certainly has potential to achieve great improvements, but it doesn't really do all the job that's needed. Certainly, it's not a substitute for sustainability. It's a help for achieving more sustainable consumption and production systems, which is one component of a sustainable society, of course. and just because we are adopting more circular system, it doesn't mean that we can have ever increasing consumption. We need to recognize that there are ecological limits and that there are planetary boundaries that we need to respect, and that we need to achieve our ecological objectives, limiting climate change, for example, on relatively short timelines. Moving on to my next point here, that there is, of course, a tendency to see countries in Europe and Japan perhaps as leading countries in this space. But we also need to admit that these countries have still just taken some baby steps towards really realizing a circular system, a circular society. If we look at the data on the resource consumption in these societies or these economies, we will see that the per capita use of natural resources in these high income countries is way, way higher than in low and middle income countries. So despite years of promotion of circular economy and sustainable consumption production, these are still the worst offenders in terms of crashing the planet. So we don't really have all the solutions in these countries. They are not really models to be emulated, and we don't really have the solutions needed. That said, of course, there are many good potentially useful technologies, lots of know-how that can be utilized from high-income countries, but they don't really have the kind of the model that can just be readily applied. No one has really the magic sauce on how to build a sustainable civilization and a circular society. There is a huge need to do lots of experimenting and piloting to see what might work in different contexts. And it's kind of useless to insist that all policy recommendations should be based on evidence and have already been successfully implemented somewhere, because this is something that's new to us, that to go through this transformation that needs to happen in the coming decades is something that humanity simply have never done. I mean, no country, no society has done this before. So we really need lots of policy innovation and willingness to try new things. Moving on here, just because something is circular doesn't mean that it has a lower environmental impact or that it's more sustainable automatically. Many things can look circular and can be marketed as circular, but they may have very limited positive contribution to environmental sustainability or sustainability in a broader sense. Take downcycling, for example, meaning a kind of recycling where you end up with a material with very low quality and very low usefulness. You can reduce waste in that manner, but is it really a desirable practice? Is it really something that we want to have lots of in a circular society? That's kind of questionable. So part of promoting a circular economy is to build the capacity of governments and of other actors to distinguish between what are the good circular practices and what are the undesirable circular practices, which ones should really be supported and promoted. So providing training in life cycle thinking and systems thinking here to see these practices in a wider context and is absolutely essential. And related with that, many of the discussions around circular economy, they tend to end up being discussions about how to do more recycling. That I've seen this numerous times that we end up in these endless discussions about recycling, and that's kind of what many people associate the word circular with. It's about the circularity of the materials, and we see all these symbols used around circular economy with this triangle with the arrows and so on, and people get the impression that circularity is mainly about materials recycling. But that's only one of the approaches to circularity, and it's actually one of the least desirable strategies. There are many others that should be given higher priority. Henning showed the 9 R's of circular strategies, and there are many other strategies that should be given higher priority and considered before we end up doing recycling. So there is a need to repeatedly remind people about the need to look at the bigger picture and to look at these upstream changes and changes to product designs and business models. Also, when working with low and middle income countries, it's important to recognize that they have many traditional practices that are aligned with circular economy objectives. Lots of reuse going on, lots of repairing, lots of repurposing of things, using them for other things than their original purpose. And it's important to recognize this and value these practices, and this can be very encouraging, I've experienced, for policymakers to see that circularity is not something it's not a foreign concept that needs to be imported from Germany or from the Netherlands or whatever. It can actually be at least partly homegrown, and there are actually existing circular practices that we can build on. That can be encouraging to recognize. And of course, although these practices exist, there is maybe room to provide extra support for them and to see how they can be upgraded and scaled up, for example, by wider use of ICT solutions, etc., etc. Also, although we are talking about circular economy here, I think it's important to look beyond the formal economy and to look at what Henning showed on his last slide, that this is also about things like culture and institutions in society. It's important to take a broad circular society approach, recognizing that circularity is not just about private businesses and their products, but it's also something that can be based on community-based activities and informal circular practices, things that are done by households themselves or by neighborhood groups or religious networks or so on, where that are very play a very important role in societies in low income and middle income countries. Important also, and this might be obvious, to target some of the low-hanging fruits to get some quick wins. And in these countries, often there are huge amounts of waste biomass that are underutilized. So that can be a kind of a fruitful entry point to start to working with circular practices. And also, on the one hand, while we try to usher in more circular practices and new ideas about circularity, at the same time, we also need to get rid of the bad old systems, that we need to phase out the linear solutions and linear systems. That may sound obvious, but it's not always practiced that way, that we need to get rid of the old also to provide room for the new to prosper. And of course, existing industries have made investments in linear systems and products and production systems. They are not very keen on this, and so there will be definitely a pushback against this transition when it comes to the getting rid of the old. But that's a fight that needs to be taken, and that often requires government interventions to tilt the playing field so that we set it in favor for more circular practices and disadvantage the old solutions that we need to get rid of. Also, when working with governments, important to be pragmatic, to make sure to work with multiple agencies and ministries, even if you have maybe a focal point that has been assigned, that you also need to try to find complementary entry points so that you have a broad array of counterparts, and not just being stuck with the person who was assigned as the person to work with, but look for people who seem to be really keen on the idea of circularity, people who really have a passion for this and who seems to get it and are willing to push for meaningful change, and to team up with such individuals and build them into champions, regardless of whether they are the persons who have the right title or the right responsibilities here. So those are the thoughts I would like to share with you here today, and I would be very interested to hear your thoughts, your comments and questions in relation to this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Magnus, and also Henning. Just a moment here. I'm going to share back to our original screen for a moment. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for giving us a view not only of, I guess, the opportunities and some of the data involved in what is the circular economy, but also actually providing some practical insights for how to really get started in really doing programmatic sort of programmatic and strategic sort of approaches from a country perspective. I think that was extremely useful. What I want to do here is with participants, we have a moment here for some questions, a bit of Q&A here with our two presenters before we move on to our panel. But perhaps as you're getting ready to post your questions in either the chat space, or you can raise your hand, use the raise hand function too, and you can just give your question verbally. So while you are thinking about some questions, let's sort of just use maybe a couple of knowledge quiz questions here to start a bit of discussion. I know I do have several questions queued up for both of you, Henning and Magnus, but let's maybe just go to a test question, a knowledge test question here. When we talk about the 10 R's that are involved in the circular economy, there is sort of a pecking order of which is more of a circular approach than the other. And so a question to participants here on the screen, this should appear on your mobile device if you have, or if you have a separate browser open on your computer, this question should appear right now, or you can just rescan the code or put in the slido.com into your browser and type in IBC green. Which do you think is a more circular approach, recycling or reuse? So a question to pose to participants. I'm going to have two questions like this to kind of, and then maybe I'll show the slide on the 10R strategy, and perhaps our two presenters could sort of comment on the context that provides. And I think ties into what Magnus sort of ended up on too, in terms of the actual practical guidance on where to start and maybe where not to just focus all the time. So 10 R's, which is more of a circular approach, recycling or reusing? And of course, most participants saw that, of course, reusing provides a bit more of a circular sort of opportunity for the circular economy than recycling does. And I think Magnus touched on this a bit in his last few slides. So one more question for everybody. Similar question: which strategy is more circular, reducing or repurposing? So I'll give you a chance to reflect on that, and perhaps Henning and I'll queue up the slide on the 10 R's here right after this poll, and perhaps both Henning and Magnus could sort of comment on that, on those 10 R's from both sort of the opportunity and I guess maybe challenges perspective. But we have a number of participants who have weighed in here, and we've got so interesting results. So on the pecking order, so this is going to be interesting now to maybe perhaps talk a bit about this as we wait for others that may have questions, and just sort of looking at the chat space to see if anyone has their hand raised right now. But maybe perhaps over to you first, Henning, and then Magnus, on, I guess, the 10 R's framework, and how that, I guess, provide some good practical sort of guidance to country teams in terms of where the strategies lay. Henning.
Yeah, I think thanks a lot. I think what the answers also clearly showed is that there are always trade-offs. Of course, for example, recycling is something where we already have a lot of technologies available where it's quite clear how to do that. And I think Magnus had it on one of his slides. Biomass is something that could be a perfect starting point for a lot of circular economy strategies. Of course, other strategies might offer even more relevant opportunities, but to implement them is also much more complex. For example, showing or looking at reuse of packaging that requires not only a technology to recycle it, but it requires a logistics system, it requires standards for sanitation, it requires a washing infrastructure. So I think that is exactly the question that every country has to look at. What is the optimal solution for our framework conditions, for our starting point? There is no no silver bullet, not the one strategy that fits for everyone. And I think that makes it really interesting to look at the full range of strategies available in order to become more circular, and then to decide also with the relevant stakeholders, what should we try to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you, Henning, for giving us a bit of elaboration on this really quite useful visual here. Magnus, I wonder if you want to have a few comments on this. And I know in a few of your slides, you talked about some of the challenges. Even you talked a bit about downscaling too, and there's some challenges on the context of that. I wonder if in the context of you maybe commenting on this particular slide here, if you could also maybe elaborate a bit on what you were mentioning on the issues and challenges of downcycling.
Yeah, I could comment on the poll that was carried out here just before with the reuse and the recycling. I think it illustrates in a good way how one should understand the 10 R's framework. This framework is a rough kind of rule of thumb. It's not like a law of nature. This is experience-based, that in principle, the strategies that are high up in the figure here on the slide should have lead to systems with a lower environmental impact. But it's not always the case. It's not automatically like that. For example, if you have an air conditioner that's 20 years old, should that one be reused? Or is it better to scrap that one and buy a new one that's way more energy efficient? In many cases, when it comes to these kinds of appliances, where the majority of the impact is in the use phase, rather than in the production phase, then it might be better to, after some, especially where there is technological innovation so that the performance improves over time, it can often be better to scrap them and to replace them with something that's has a lower consumption of energy and resources. Similarly, reuse is often used as a pretext for shipping used products like old cars and old electronics to low-income countries. And that can have benefits in some cases, but if you look at the situation in these countries, they don't have the infrastructure to collect and treat these items safely, so they end up being harmful. Is that really a good kind of reuse, or would it be better to collect and recycle these items in high-income countries that have the capacity to deal with these materials in a safe manner? I mean, there's no obvious answer to that, and that's why you need to have this capacity for systems thinking, for actually doing some quantitative analysis on this, and also to have a proper dialogue with all the stakeholders to find a kind of a common vision of what is a good solution for these types of products.
Excellent. Thanks, Magnus. Actually, it was very quite practical examples and insights following on what you had mentioned in your slides. We do have a couple of questions here in the chat space. So while we have you both on camera here, maybe one quick for Magnus. We have Marika with UNEP. is wondering if you, Magnus, could give some examples of upstream solutions that are applicable to the region. I guess, well, I'll turn that one over to you. If you require a bit of elaboration on the question, we may ask Marika to step in, but over to you, Magnus.
No, that's fine. I mean, with upstream, I mean, basically the upper part of the image we're looking at here, these strategies that are basically above recycling. Recycling and energy recovery are really the lowest option. And I mean, there are numerous examples where companies are now adopting reuse models, are using reusable cups instead of single-use cups, for example, for coffee and other beverages. Repair is also becoming common. We have reuse of garments and apparel. There are entire industries around the second-hand use of products and refurbishments of products. So examples abound.
Excellent. Thanks. We have another question. We have Roberto posing the question, and maybe, well, I'll turn this over to both of you, Henning and also Magnus, to react to. But Roberto is asking, what is the role of public policies in encouraging producers and consumers to adopt these 10R strategies? So there's obviously a policy layer to help really realize these 10R strategies. How do those kind of come into play?
Yeah, well, if I may start, I think that is exactly the key question. So thanks a lot for that. Now, what kind of enabling framework conditions do we actually need that for companies as well as for consumers, it makes sense to switch from linear to circular systems? And here I think the national circular economy strategies that are currently developed in a lot of countries, I think that is the key enabler for that. And I'll be happy to share 2 reports that we did for the European Environment Agency and that the OECD did on exactly useful circular economy policy frameworks. Because I think that this is the key challenge now, how to steer investments into that, how to give security also for the industry, that they can actually invest in more circular systems. We all agree that there are a lot of benefits. We all agree that we're not there yet, and I think the policymakers have to create this push for everyone to become more circular.
I would like to add also the shifting the economy around this, that often virgin materials are cheap, partly because of government subsidies and because extractive industries don't really have to cover the real costs of the kind of the damage they do to the natural systems. And by having these subsidies or not really requiring these industries to take their responsibility, governments are really shooting themselves in the foot, because they are undermining the profitability of new circular businesses. So getting rid of the old ones to shift to tilt the playing field there, as I talked about before, so that it's not set in favor of the incumbent industries and the bad linear solutions and the use of new materials and resources, but that it's actually tilted in favor of circular systems instead of is one of the keys. Of course, economy is just one part. We need lots of other things. We need, as Henning said, we need comprehensive policy frameworks. We need education and awareness building. We need to have technical standards. We need to have regulations, etc., etc. So it's complex, but no single easy solution. But I think those are some of the things that we need to build on.
Yes, no, it's the perfect point. I mean, it's always a mix of policy instruments that help to move the needle on approaches, particularly circular economy. So thanks for reminding us too that subsidy reform is an important lever in that whole mix. And Henning, thanks too also for the links you put in the chat space on policy frameworks for circular economy. I might ask also too if in the course of the panel session that comes next, if you might want to also add those links to our virtual wall space, which I see is becoming quite the active place right now. So just to, before we go to the panel, just to remind our participants that we do have quite a bit of activity on the virtual wall space, and we will come back to this space after this the next panel session here. We have lots of good examples here and links of practical tools and case examples and also challenges too. So I encourage participants to visit this space too over the course of the next few moments here in the webinar. But back now to the panel. So thank you very much to both Henning and Magnus for setting the stage here for circular economy in terms of opportunities and also some practical guidance. So thank you very much for the two of you. I know Magnus too, you'll have opportunity to kind of re-engage too as you hear from the panelists. So we welcome you to stay tuned. And right now, I think I'll turn the floor over to Henning, who is going to moderate this panel session and introduce our panelists. So I may ask our panelists now to turn their cameras on, and Henning can introduce you and set the stage and get this the next layer of our conversation started in this webinar. So over to you, Henning.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Darren. And of course, thanks a lot to my three panelists. Really grateful that you joined us today in order to dig a bit deeper into what does circular economy actually mean in specific sectors or for specific value chains, and what can be done on it in practice. So I'm really happy to have with me Milan Veselinov, the director of Cericon in Serbia, Professor Stefan Lechtenböhmer, he's professor at the University Lund and also my colleague here at the Wuppertal Institute, and we have Marit Nielses working with UNECE. And Milan, if we could maybe start with you. You're not only the director of Cericon, but as that also the project coordinator of a really fascinating project called Western Balkan Beacons, and that works or tries to support circular economy approaches in the Western Balkan countries. Maybe as a first question, could you tell us a little bit more about this specific project and how it aims to support circular economy in that specific region?
Thank you very much, Henning. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude and words of thanks to the organizers of the event for welcoming me and having this opportunity to actually spread a couple of nice examples from our repository of projects, one of which is really one of the biggest ones that we are leading, that is Circular Economy Balkan Beacons, or in official name, Western Circular Economy and Innovation Western Beacons. So the project actually aims to make a systemic change in the Balkans and start with this traction, shifting the industry, but also policymakers, also in engaging with the research and innovation arena in the whole Balkans. There were two things that we realized. One was from the previous project that the lack and sporadic level and sporadic areas of knowledge are present in the Balkans. And we realized that progress with this kind of typology of knowledge, which is one would be related to recycling, the second would be related to environmental protection, only a very few examples of maybe some higher circularity, such as maybe manufacturing knowledge about manufacturing, knowledge about how the policy should reframe the whole system existed. So we realized there is a huge gap of unifying or getting the full scope of circularity as a knowledge. And the second one was there are a couple of smaller markets for which at the end of the day, most probably wouldn't be feasible to do different value chains, different circular value chains, because it would be, as we noticed, would be too expensive for them to shift to circular economy. So for these two reasons, we united the region and we started to work really in parallel together with the industry, together with cities and policymakers, and also together with innovators to try to offer regional solutions for regional problems.
So there are numerous results out of this project, but it aims to synergistically bring results and synergistically move the systemic transition towards circular economy through collaboration and innovation. So we're trying to detach from the old narrative of recycling and waste management, which is highly popular in this area, and move towards innovative way of how circular economy should be presented and how it should actually generate value.
Thank you very much, Milan. It looks like a really, really interesting project. And you mentioned the cooperation also with industries and cities. And maybe you could share some of your experiences. What do you see as the concrete benefits from such a project? For example, for a sector like the construction sector, because in your cooperation with cities, I guess that is a topic that often comes up.
Yeah. Definitely, it is one of the most popular industries that are getting.
Milan, could you maybe?
Economy? Yes.
Could you do that again? With
yeah.
Perfect.
So it is definitely one of the most interested sectors to get in traction or to get on track on circularity, and one of the benefits are some of the benefits that through this and through other initiatives we saw are a huge or solving of huge historical waste problems that can be turned into materials, such as the fly ash, such as the other type of ash, slag, or maybe some excess of textile materials or apparel materials that can be used in the construction industry again. And one of the initiatives, and now we're still talking about the material level. And one thing that we did in the project was how to redesign an area that will contribute to sustainability of neighborhoods and using every circularity principle in rebuilding this area. And in that way, trying to shift the mindsets of future architects or from current architects and construction workers or construction engineers and other connected actors, not to only think about how to reuse and use different kind of materials, but how to mind shift to a new way of using areas and buildings using these circularity principles. So these are two areas that I see currently becoming a trend and becoming popular in this area. And we're going to most probably open a new project that it will focus only on that, providing a space to explore and experiment with the new circularity idea using the construction and architecture, so actually building industry as a model for it.
Milan, thanks a lot. I think especially on that topic, there was a really important question in the chat. Looking at the opportunities, how could in a country like Serbia circular economy promoted given the necessary initial investments? Now, how do you see that as a barrier, and what are your experiences? Now, how could it be addressed?
So it depends on which level are we talking about. If we talk about the industry, or we talk about company itself, or we talk about also the country itself. Firstly, I would maybe, because of lack of time, focus on the company level. One of the methodologies that we've invented together with your team, Henning, was the implementation framework for circular economy, which exactly points out not to focus on huge investments and huge sunk costs, but to focus on small spin-offs, small experimentation and pilots that will firstly generate knowledge and insights, where to go, how to pivot strategically, and then step by step actually go into the circularity transformation or circularity transition for that sake. And in that sense, the clients that we work with or companies that we work for slowly shift their minds, explore opportunities, start collaborate with new stakeholders, and actually in the back of the curtains starting to build their ecosystem of circularity, starting to build their new value chain, even if not realizing in the time where they're doing. And that is something that we try to promote always, is the concept of learning by doing, and not really planning and then smacking with a huge amount of investments, which will inevitably come. But the first way, it's one of the perceived barriers, and we try with these implementation frameworks to kind of alleviate this, firstly psychological, planning, and otherwise human factor of having a barrier of huge investments. On the other side, we have also underutilization of funds that are offered to Serbian systems, whatever they may be focused on. And in these ways, we are trying also to utilize these funds or these capacities that we can for modernization, innovation in this green domain.
Milan, thank you very much. I think learning by doing, I think that could be one of the key takeaways from the whole webinar. Circular economy is an adventure, and we can only learn.
True, and we have to be
by
brave
actually implementing
for
it.
this. Yeah.
Milan, thank you so much. Maybe you could share the project website also in the chat so that others could have a look at it and get in contact with you if they have more questions.
Just maybe final two words now, because everything is focused on learning by doing, and that has to happen in collaboration. We're actually building a platform for this. So I think from January on, we will be happy to invite you to use and try this platform, which is exactly focused on problem solving, experts, capacity building, and basically collaboration. So with this, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Milan. Yeah, and with that, let's shift the focus a bit on circular economy in the industry. And Stefan, you are working on industrial transformations in the industry with a lot of different stakeholders, with a lot of different companies. Maybe you could share a bit your feeling. How is the industry looking at circular economy? Do they see it as a burden? Do they see it as an opportunity? What is your feeling about that? And how could that also be linked to climate protection?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, thank you, Henning. Actually, we are working with the bigger industries, with the heavy industries, such as steel makers, basic chemistry, cement makers, etc. And of course, in all these sectors, recycling and circular economy is different. I would say they are, of course, interested in that, but far from really doing that strategically. If we go, for example, to steel industry, steel, and we are mainly talking to primary steel makers, so that delivering the virgin material, not the secondary material. But they, of course, claim, okay, the steel is almost completely recycled, and it's the best recycled product in the world, which is somehow correct. However, I think on the long term, we need to rethink this system, because currently a lot of this is somehow downcycled. The high quality virgin steel qualities are used, for example, in car making, and then because basically of a lack of destruction of the cars, they become polluted with many other elements. The most problematic is copper, and then you can still reuse the steel for making reinforced bars to put that into the concrete of high rises, etc. But that steel, you never can make a car again out of it. So I think to really become more circular, we would need to rethink the whole system, which then includes the whole value chain with much more actors. And currently everything works. The economy is behind it. It's obviously seems not attractive to take more care to remove unwanted materials out of the steel recycling, because you can sell it even at a low quality. And so there's, from our perspective, a long way to go if we really want to ramp up circularity in a more sensible way, so to say. The rates are still already high in steel.
Stefan, you mentioned that the need for a systemic approach. What could that be in concrete terms? So what could be options for companies, for example, in the steel industry, to actually increase the share of recycled input? What do you think would be first steps, for example?
Yeah, I think, of course, secondary steel has a much lower carbon footprint. And we are currently seeing a trend, for example, in automobile industry going, and for them, the largest share of their rucksack is the steel in the car. That's the biggest footprint. And so they are looking for greener steel, at least in starting with some premium products. They want to claim they are particularly green also. So they are looking into that direction. And maybe it will be interesting for steel makers to have secondary steel better in their portfolio. There's, of course, secondary steel makers. Often it's quite a different ecosystem, I would say. Some of them even run scrap yards, etc. So are in a more complete value chain, but that's not that much linked to the primary steel makers. So joining forces there could be an option, and I think it might be triggered if there is a stronger focus from, for example, automobile industry to purchase green steel qualities, which is already there. Maybe there could also be some regulation for emission factors of steel making. However, current discussion on that one clearly divides between primary steel making and secondary steel making. So you cannot really, which is on the one end, of course, correct, because it's completely different businesses, but you cannot somehow improve your average by having more secondary. So probably needs additional policy instruments there.
If you already have specific policy instruments in mind, or what do you see what the industry itself would propose? So how could this kind of discussion be supported also from a policy point of view?
Yeah, it's for the steelmaking discussion is not that much advanced yet. So discussion is more focusing on making green primary steel using hydrogen. However, the technology enables higher recycling rates. So even in the primary steel, we have on average 20% scrap. With the hydrogen-based direct reduction, we are much more flexible with scrap rates. So that will change, but it's a long-term project because so far it's only in the pilot projects, this technology. Yeah, I think we need to focus that, but we haven't really made up plans. It's policy in that sector is not that advanced.
But from an industry perspective, if I understood you correctly, it is a long-term process. So probably they would have a demand for also long-term policies, visions, stable regulations. It will require, what you described as the systemic change, a lot of investments from industry side, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Particularly the changes in the primary steel making require a lot of investment and lots of green energy, which is expensive. So that's maybe even the bigger point of that. For the secondary steel making, is a lot of it made via electricity, which is in principle easy to make green, but again, you have to pay for it. But I think that's an important point that you made. To convert these industries, we really need long-term stable policies, strong involvements by the governments, and we are arguing for that. But it's really maybe so far undervalued part of it that also should contain a strategy towards more or better circularity.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Stefan. And final question, just to end on an optimistic note. If I understood you correctly, the industry is highly interested in that, and they started working on that. So probably also a lot of openness for cooperation with policymakers in different areas of the world, right?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly also when you go into other sectors, chemical industry is also a big issue to make that more circular. And as already mentioned by Magnus, economies are not well there. But chemical industry, for example, is extremely interested, and there's a lot of option for cooperation. Steel industry probably also, but is not that advanced. So at this moment, I would say.
Yeah, and then your final question from the chat, because it was asked: do you see similar developments only in also in middle and low income countries, or is that limited somehow to the very rich OECD countries? Do you have an overview on that or an idea?
Yeah, on the steel transition, it's of course starting in Western Europe, but also China is very advanced on that. For low and middle income countries are often not that advanced at the moment. However, their steel industry is also different. Typically, it's much more dependent on secondary steel, so they are in a different situation. They are rather those using those downstream materials. And if we start in high income economies trying to get higher quality recycling, that will have repercussions, sometimes maybe not even very easy ones, on low and middle income countries, which are currently benefiting. So most of the German cars end up in Egyptian houses. So something like that, there will be changes.
It sounds like an opportunity for mutual learning between steel industry in Germany and Egypt and in other countries. Stefan, thank you very, very much for your insights into your cooperation with industry.
Thank you for inviting me.
Really helpful.
Thank you.
And then finally, let's look at again completely different sector, circularity in the agricultural sector. And Marit, thank you so much for being with us today. You are working with UNECE on food losses. And maybe you could just briefly explain to those of us who haven't worked in that sector, why is this an important topic, and where do you see the interlinkages to circular economy?
Well, thank you, Henning, and thank you for the question and for having ECE on this panel. Food loss and waste not only means the loss of edible food, it also means that the resources that went into producing that food goes to waste, like all the other circularity areas we're talking about. But here we're talking water, energy, fertilizers, fuel to drive the machinery, and the land use also. And since the production of food globally accounts for around 70% of global freshwater withdrawals, a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions, and 2/3 of nitrogen pollution. This is actually a substantial, it has reducing food loss and waste can have a substantial impact. Because today, globally, around 1/3 of all food produced is estimated to be lost or wasted along supply chains or by consumers. And that is counting from farm gate and onwards. Counting before that is even more difficult. And that means with 1/3 of all food lost, with the impact or with the materials used that I just mentioned, it means that around 25% of the water use and some 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture is used to produce food that does not end up being eaten. So if we can reduce that, it can of course have a very important impact. It can strengthen sustainability of food systems on many fronts, or by reducing the input use, as I mentioned, water, nitrogen, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions, while increasing incomes also and ensuring more availability of food. So it's a many sides to win type of action. And we spoke earlier about circular economy and what it means. So in the agri-food sector, it basically implies this. It implies minimizing the use of external inputs, closing nutrient loops, as was mentioned also, reducing negative discharges to the environment, and then minimizing food loss and waste, and increasing the use of agricultural byproducts. If we look at, for example, growing maize, you have a lot of byproducts, and it's important to ensure that all the products or the parts of the plant are well used. So circularity is to some degree inherent in agriculture, but much more can be done, and food loss and waste is a key part of that.
Thank you very much. 1/3 of all food not lost or wasted. I mean, that's a horrible figure. And the question, of course, is then what could be done on that? And I know that you've been working on specific tools to address that. Maybe you could share a bit with us. What do you see as potential approaches in that area?
Yeah, it's of course a very complex area, and we talked about system thinking. I mean, there are many areas where we need to address this. At ECE, our work on agriculture and food loss and waste is linked to our long-standing work stream on agricultural quality standards. And in this work stream, ECE has been actually for the past 70 years been involved in setting quality standards, basically voluntary standards for marketing standards for food. And the focus is on fresh fruit and vegetables, dried fruits and nuts, meat, and seed potatoes. And linked to this work, we've been working on food loss and waste and looking at what can we do to help reduce food loss and waste. Also looking at how can we work through the standards. Our delegates are looking at how can the standards be. These are minimum quality standards, contrary to some private sector standards, for example. But the experts have been looking at how can we look at the different paragraphs in these standards to adjust them so that these still are helpful for facilitating trade in these products, because trade is very important for both for incomes and for actually the efficiency of food systems. But the work, in addition to this work, our experts have been looking at what can we do to reduce food loss and waste. And it's a lot around basically ensuring keeping quality. And the focus has been on fresh fruit and vegetables. And ECE has developed a code of good practice for reducing food loss in fresh fruit and vegetable value chains, and a food loss and waste measuring methodology to also do, well, as we know, what you can't measure, you can't manage. So with that idea. And also a minimum quality specification for fresh fruit and vegetables. And the code of good practice is, I think, the centerpiece of this. It looks at ensuring keeping quality in the value chain by providing practical advice to the different stages in the chain, to producers, to traders, transporters, and retailers, because the whole value chain is interdependent. And fresh fruit and vegetables, for example, are very sensitive to temperature and handling. And if it's not handled well early in the stage, in the chain, it might be spoiled at the retail stage, even though it's not the fault of the retailer, for example. So this is the idea of this work, and it's linked to FAO has developed a voluntary code of conduct for food loss and waste reduction, which is generic. And this one could be seen as a sector-specific, in a way, I guess, complement to this, because it's looking specifically at the fresh fruit and vegetable value chain. So these are some of the things that we've been doing at ECE on the food loss and waste side. And we also have some other activities related to circularity.
Because it was my question also in the for the other panelists. How would you see that? Are there options to implement such tools and the code of conduct also in low and middle income countries? Or could you share a bit with us? What are you doing on the ground? Are there already initiatives that you're working on?
Yeah, definitely. On your first question, the Code of Good Practice was initially developed in 2019-20, and then our experts were decided that they wanted to look at it specific with that angle in mind. How can we ensure that this is useful for developing countries too? So that is why we are the second edition of the Code of Good Practice was developed, where that actually looks into involving a larger number of stakeholders from different countries in developing the code and looking at how we can ensure that it's useful also in developing countries settings. And the second edition also includes the chapter on transporters, which was not there earlier, but it's a key part of the value chain. And regarding implementation, the code was developed during COVID times. So we are now developing some additional explanatory, even more practical, illustrated explanatory materials to go with the code for some specific product groups. But in terms of rolling out and ensuring working with different stakeholders, that's something that we are looking to do in the coming year now that, or years now that the situation is better.
So fingers crossed that it will be possible to actually continue working on that. Marit, thank you so much. And thank you also to the other panelists, Milan and Stefan, for providing a bit more insights into how circular economy looks in practice in different sectors. I think
Henning, can I just add one thing?
Yes, of course.
A last pitch.
Yes,
so
we're
so at EC we're also doing work on. I'm in the Trade Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of EC, and we're also working on some other angles related to circular economy. For example, we have a large work stream on trade facilitation, and within that we have a project looking at circular at traceability and its role in ensuring sustainability and circularity. So that's one of the areas where I think my colleague Anastasia will copy some things on the chat here, but we've also have a project on supporting the circular economy transition in CE member states, where we've set up a circular step, you see behind me here, stakeholder network. And we've been working with, we are working with Serbia to support them in circular transition in agri-food, and with Tajikistan, and thanks to the RC offices in Serbia and Tajikistan for your support in recent workshops on this. So my colleague Anastasia will copy some things, some links here on the chat. I just wanted to also say that if you're interested in digging a bit deeper in this topic, we have just launched a podcast on food loss and waste that came up on ECE Twitter yesterday. So you can go and look at that. It will come on the chat. And last year we held a roundtable on circularity in agri-food trade, and that recording is also available for anyone interested in digging a bit deeper on these topics. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Marin. Actually, I already downloaded the podcast. It will be I'll be listening to on my way back home later today. So wonderful. Really, thanks a lot. There was indeed also a question from Nick asking, what is your experience? How could consumers be engaged? No? Because when we talk about food losses, of course, the focus is a bit on industry, but also, if I understood you correctly, a lot of food is wasted in households. So how do you see the role of consumers?
The role of consumers is super important. I mean, we will need consumer education. I think, I mean, we're all grown up knowing that we shouldn't waste food, but society has become rather abundant with food, and we're not always able to do as we were taught as children. So the role of consumers is very important. I think in the UN, the custodians of like the kind of issue of food loss and waste is FAO and UNEP. And FAO keeps an index of food loss, which means kind of earlier in the chain, up to retail. And UNEP keeps the index of food waste. So it's for statistical purposes. And food loss is estimated to be, I mean, they're approximately half each, right, of this third that is being lost, but 17% is estimated, with, of course, in the Western countries, waste is estimated to be higher, the waste end versus the loss end, whereas in some developing countries, the loss end might be higher because of lack of cold chain and things like this. But definitely, we as consumers, there is a lot we can do. FAO, I recently participated in an FAO conference in Istanbul on this issue with a lot of good examples shared. I think we can also get that link to anyone who's interested in looking. There were lots of business examples and practical examples. So I'd be happy to get that link to you and for anyone who's interested in looking at that. But definitely repurposing. There is when you look at food loss and waste, there is a kind of waste management hierarchy, like the 10R thing that we're talking about in general. Here it's kind of an inverted triangle where prevention is, of course, at the top. And that's why we're focusing on that in our work. So reduce is the first, and then redistribute comes after, and then animal feed are kind of after that. But reduce is the key, and consumers are critical to that, but they can't do everything, right? I mean, and that's why at ECE, because of our work on in the trade side, we look at the loss end of the value chain. We try to look at the earlier stages of the value chain and see what we can do there. But consumers are definitely key, all of us.
Thanks a lot, Marit. Reduce is key. Yeah, that's a great way for me, or an opportunity to thanks again you, Marit, also the other panelists. And I think for the broader discussion, I would hand back over to you, Darren. So thanks again from my side.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Henning. And thank you very much, all the panelists. I think that was a really good illustration of how inherently pragmatic the circular economy approach is. I think each of the panelists really brought that home, and thank you all very much for that. So not only is it a pragmatic approach, I think it's also it can be applied across all sectors, of course. And we had 3 really good examples here in the panel session, Henning. So thank you very much for that. Also, a lot of practical tools to support the actual implementation of the circular economy. And I thank colleagues Anastasia for populating in the chat space. And also, I'll draw our attention here just quickly to the virtual wall space and the information that is being posted there. You'll see quite a bit of activity. And just to kind of tie back to Marit's his last note there was about the podcast that's coming up at UNECE. You'll see in the virtual wall space the link to that podcast there for anyone to do it. And you also have it in the chat space. Thank you very much, Anastasia, for that. So lots of really good examples here. And I see we've had some questions in the chat space that are being addressed directly. So I encourage participants right now, we do have time right now to look at some questions, to pose some questions to our panelists in addition. And we also have some sharing here to do, and we want to hear from you, folks from the country offices that are grappling with this, wanting to make some progress. What have been some of your experiences? What are the challenges, and what information and supports do you need in a country office to really make some progress toward programming in a circular economy? I'll draw our attention to some case examples here that have been posted in the first column of the virtual wall space, maybe as a way here to have colleagues from across the webinar here to share some examples. We do have a post here from examples that the UNECE has compiled, where Turkey has developed a concept and a circular economy action plan. We see Serbia has developed a roadmap for a circular economy. Uzbekistan developed an action plan for the development of a circular economy for the ag value chain. and also Georgia working on development of a circular economy strategy, and Tajikistan on endorsing green economy concepts. So if there are colleagues on the webinar right now from those offices that would like to share some additional insights on those examples of the plans and the strategies for getting a circular economy, I know your colleagues and other offices would certainly be appreciative of that. So I leave that, the floor is open right now for colleagues, just to raise your hand and turn your mic on if you do want to share an example from a country office, or even just a challenge that you've experienced in a country office. And maybe perhaps while we're waiting for colleagues from country office to kind of share some examples, either verbally or in the chat space, I don't know if there's colleagues from the UNEEC that may wish to elaborate a bit on the Turkey, Serbia, Uzbekistan, and Georgia strategic approaches. You can feel free to turn your mic on. You'll see also too in the chat space a lot of examples here with links, specific links. Here you see one very specific example here in the garment and footwear industry in Tajikistan, and a link to some more information. Of course, now we've got ag and food loss in Serbia, a link to a report back here in July. And if you do have questions about any of these examples that you do see in the wall space, you can add a comment directly to it. We also see another example here, Serbia and the Balkans of green economy. And if anybody wishes to elaborate on any of these, just feel free to turn your mic on. I want to draw attention to the challenges, of course. So I think each of the panelists did have a chance to talk a bit about some of the challenges that are occurring. Stefan brought up some of the challenges, of course, in the steel industry. We've got some posts here relating to regulations and specific challenges that are experienced. So lots of good information here to comb through from a practical side in terms of the circular economy. Any last questions from panelists before we go to a closing and a wrap up?
Maybe I can just add that if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us about the ECE material, me or my colleague Anastasia or Selena. And a lot of this came from the work that we're doing and the circular step and the project. Thank you.
Excellent. And I do see if Anastasia, that was maybe the point. If Anastasia wanted to intervene, please feel free. And thank you for all the posts in the virtual chat space. That's very pragmatic for everybody.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Anastasia Pankova. I'm a consultant in UNEC, and with the Circular Economy team, we are working on the project funded by UNDA on accelerating the circular economy in the UNEC region. As you may see in the Padlet, I put examples of two countries. It's Serbia and Tajikistan, who are beneficiary countries of the project. We are very grateful to the resident coordinator office in these countries for support, because our national policy dialogues held on the circular economy was quite successful. We got a lot of useful insights on the circular economy. In Serbia, it was food loss and waste management. In Tajikistan, it is traceability of value chains in garments and footwear as a first pilot entry point to the circular transition. We are very looking forward to developing national roadmaps in these countries based on the gap analysis that we are also developing as a result of the national policy dialogues. We also have future project activities in Georgia and Kazakhstan. And I invite you to follow our activities in our network Circular Step that was launched in April of this year. It's a multi-stakeholder knowledge sharing network that we follow the mission to close the gap between developed countries of the region like European Union and North America and the 17 UNEC program countries. So far, we have 20 member states who officially nominated their national focal points. We are open to the membership of from UN member states in the UNEC region and beyond in official capacity as well as in personal capacity from businesses, private sector, from NGOs, think tanks, and I invite you to check the Padlet for relevant links. You can fill in the questionnaire and we will contact you regarding our membership. And we're also developing official platform website where we will put all the activities so that it's all visible. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anastasia, and for populating the Padlet space with some very practical information. I do want to draw attention to two participants to the column there that talks about what information and supports do you need and require at the country office level to help sort of get going or to break over some hurdles in the circular economy approach. This Padlet space will remain open here for the next, for the remainder of the week. So if you do have some ideas you want to add to here, please feel free. This will be, the space will be open after the webinar ends. And I'm sure the agencies that are supporting circular economy will be interested in knowing concretely sort of the specific needs of country offices. And thank you, colleague Rasian from Uzbekistan, the RCO there, about the transition to the green economy. I see you posted that in the Padlet space and also in the chat space with the link. So again, more practical examples of some forward progress. I think before we just head off, any last sort of words or thoughts or observations from your side? I want to just thank you on behalf of the IBC team for both orchestrating the presentations in the first half with you and Magnus. Magnus, thank you very much. And also our three panelists in the second half, Stefan, Marit, of course, in Milan with some practical examples. Any last sort of observations on your side?
Well, no, I also wanted to thank you, Darren, for really keeping this together. What I think, also this this wall shows, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many really interesting experiences on specific challenges, specific questions. So it makes a lot of sense to improve the exchange of information on that. For me, from a consulting point of view, of course, not really helpful. We could try to resell all that so many times, but to be honest, I think it makes a lot of sense to ask around who has experiences with what and to learn from each other. So thanks a lot for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Henning, for everything. So now just going back to our sort of the last part of the webinar here to close things out. Before I turn the floor over to Mariana Bolshakova from UNEP to give us some closing remarks, I do want to bring our attention, colleagues, on the webinar to the evaluation form, which is on Slido, and this will appear on your Slido now if you have it on your mobile device or on your web browser. Of course, you can again you can use the barcode and scan it again, or go to slido.com, type in IBC Green, and you'll access the evaluation questions. There's about 5 questions here that'll be very quick for you to answer, but it's extremely helpful to the IBC core team to hear from you about the webinar, the content, and also there's a space here in the training form if you are looking for some specific help on the circular economy in a country office. You can put in your contact information, and the IBC core team will be in touch with you to follow up to ensure that you do have the supports you needed to gain traction and move the needle on the circular economy approach in your country. So with that, I'm just going to, I'll turn it right over on this, leave this screen open for you to work on the poll, but over to you, Mariana, to close things out for today.
Thank you very much, Darren, and good afternoon and good evening to colleagues. Well, the discussion showed today, circular economies is one of those win-win-win situation and solutions for the sustainable way of development, for addressing the climate challenges, for stimulating research and development, for national security, lots of other issues in the society overall. But it also requires a very significant transformation. And as the UN, we have particular responsibility in our work on SDGs to assist countries in shifting gears and moving towards more circular and sustainable policies. And you in the country teams are uniquely placed to support such transitions. So we encourage you to use the guidance materials and the information from today's discussion. And the IBC team is 19 agencies strong, so we are available to support you where support and information are needed. So please do come back to us with any specific requests. The discussion board will remain open, so you can continue exchange. And then the event itself was recorded, and the materials will be available on the IBC's website. And we encourage you to not only use, but also to circulate that information further among your colleagues. As Darren mentioned, your feedback on the webinar today will be extremely helpful for us, because this is one webinar in a series of several for us to prepare the next ones. So the feedback is very important. So I very much encourage you to use that link on your screen and fill in the form. Talking about the next webinars, as was announced at this beginning of today, the next webinar will take place on the 10th of November, which is Thursday, and will focus on the big challenge that the countries and the world in general face today, and that is the massive amount of plastics being generated. And you may have heard that there is now a negotiation process on a new global treaty to address plastics pollution. And in fact, the first negotiating session on that treaty will start in November, and they aim to finish with the treaty in just 2 years. So this webinar, you will have the opportunity to hear from colleagues who are supporting the negotiations process on why the UN and the member states decided this problem is so serious it requires a multilateral agreement. And we'll also discuss what this means for the implementation on the ground already now, and what new commitments may arise from these international developments, and what the UN can do on the ground and already does to support countries in addressing the plastics problem. So please do join us on the 10th of November. We are extremely grateful for your participation today, and also extremely grateful to all the speakers today, and also to our excellent IASD team and to the IBC team behind the webinar. So I hope to see you on the 10th of November, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and colleagues. The evaluation forum will remain open here for about the next 30 minutes. Even after the webinar stops, the forum will remain open, and so you can take your time to complete in your input. Appreciate it. And with that, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.